This year, I decided to stop saving for a down payment until I build a $762,000 stock market portfolio. I'm on track to reach financial independence in my 40s, but I also want to buy a home. Finding the balance between saving for both of these financial goals on a modest income has been challenging. However, after I calculated early Coast FI, it completely changed how I think about home ownership, and it made goal setting so much simpler. This is part 3 of the 3 things I did instead of buying a home that ended up making me rich. The third thing I did was prioritize early Coast FI. And the math I'm about to show you is going to explain why this felt like the most peaceful decision. If you're new to this series, I set out to buy a home in 2020, following what I thought was the best path to being the best steward of my money. Since I was working in what I thought was my forever career, it felt like a really good next step to buy a home. After several failed attempts and going back and forth between saving my money and then recharacterizing that money to retirement money and then starting the saving process all over again for a couple of years, I finally had about $20,000 accumulated in I-bonds by the end of 2024. And that money was specifically earmarked for a future down payment. Outside of that, though, I hadn't been actively saving for a down payment. Instead, what I was doing was continuing to invest aggressively. However, in 2024, something shifted. I was recently married. I had gotten married in 2023. I was in a new part-time job and my portfolio just kept growing and growing. So I had some pretty good financial stability. And an important note is that I also had access to affordable housing through my part-time job. So because of all of this, I actually started to view home ownership a little differently. Because the house prices started to skyrocket and the interest rates also started to go up, I began to view home ownership as more of a luxury and not so much a necessity or even a good financial decision or an optimal financial decision in my situation. And although I had been saving for a house for years, I wasn't willing to invest less of my money into the stock market. And that's exactly what I would have had to do in order to be a competitive applicant. And regardless of what was happening in the market or in my personal life, there was still this cultural belief and still is this cultural belief that buying a home should be prioritized kind of at all costs, and it will always be a positive thing. As I was running the numbers and taking a closer look at them, the numbers were telling me a different story. So now in this new context of mine as a dual income with no kids situation, I ran some math again, and I decided that I wanted to wait to save for a down payment until my husband reached his first 100K invested and I reached my first 500K invested. And the reason for those numbers is because they were pretty similar in timeline. And this actually became a foundational guide for me. And it's a guideline that I really wish somebody would have told me back in 2020. If someone had just told me to don't even think about saving for a down payment until I had at least $100,000 invested, I would have been so grateful for them. The reason why I love 100K invested before even thinking about saving for a down payment is because if you manage to do that by the time that you are 30, you can actually stop investing altogether at that point, and you can still reach $1 million that is inflation adjusted by age 65. And this isn't a rule, it's just a good guideline. It would have forced me to be clear about my priorities and really look at the math. So in 2024, I decided to pause house hunting altogether and again, recharacterize that $20,000 that I had in my I-bonds into financial independence funds in the stock market. So I took my funds out of my I-bonds in 2 installments. The first was January of 2024. I had put in $10,000 back in 2022, and I took out $10,656 in January. In August of 2024, I took out my second installment of $10,000 $800, and that was from $10,000 that I had put in February of 2023. When I took my money out of my I bonds, I recharacterized those funds. Once again, I had put them towards early retirement money in the stock market. And this brought my down payment savings down to $0 again. This is now the third time that I had recharacterized my funds. And this time it felt different though, because this time my mindset about home ownership was changing, especially compared to 28-year-old Anita in 2020. Back then, I had really viewed home ownership as kind of a responsible thing to do and a way to build wealth. And I was really trying to cut housing costs by having roommates. It was definitely a more like scarcity-based approach to home ownership, if I'm being honest. And it almost had this sort of like kind of young and dumb energy where I was sort of just trying to like hack my way to having this asset. I will say that looking back, I'm very glad 28-year-old Anita did not get a home for many reasons, but mostly because what ended up happening is that I was able to have more freedom and peace of mind without a home. And I no longer feel like I have to hack home ownership in any kind of way. Instead, I get to think about home ownership as a luxury. I now view it as an opportunity to purchase mine and my family's little sanctuary. And I'm approaching it from a place of abundance. I would love a home to raise my kids in. I want to feel inspired in my home. And I don't necessarily want to think about optimizing financially. I want land for my dogs and kids to run and play. And I don't even need a lot of bedrooms. In fact, the smaller, the better, because I don't want to be spending my life just maintaining things and having home projects to always be doing and rooms to be cleaning or worrying about them being clean. However, the architecture is a non-negotiable. I need the architecture to be A+. Like my home is going to be a charming, well-designed home. In fact, my husband and I have an exact property that we would love to own one day. And for us, it's our dream forever home. However, we are not in a rush to get there. And to be honest, by the end of this year, him and I will be at that milestone that we had said we would pause homeownership for. I'll be reaching $500,000 invested by the end of this year, and he'll be reaching $100K invested by the end of this year. However, after doing some calculations, which are the ones that I want to talk to you about, I decided to extend the timeline just a bit. And I decided that a better place for me personally to switch priorities would be reaching early coast FI. My husband and I have not had a conversation about when it makes sense for him to start saving for a home, but I know for myself, I will not be prioritizing a down payment next year. And I personally have a feeling that he probably won't either, but to be determined. So what I'm going to be doing is waiting until I reach early coast FI. And to me, this decision makes me feel very grounded. It makes me feel very peaceful because it's coming from a place of abundance and not scarcity. So instead of really trying to get the numbers to work through hustle and sacrifice, I'm building a foundation that's going to make my dream possible without feeling rushed. And more importantly, I won't feel like I'm having to sacrifice my timeline to total freedom. And I don't know what's going to come first, if I'm going to get to early coast FI first or to my 40s. But if I had to wait even until my 40s to start saving for a down payment, I would totally be okay with that. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be waiting until my 40s, but I think the minimum I'm willing to do right now is wait until I reach early coast FI, because that math is very compelling to me. And once you see these numbers, I think you'll understand. Most people know about coast FI, and if you don't, let me just take a second to explain it to you because it's a super simple concept. Coast FI is this idea that you can front load your investments so that you can stop investing altogether and your nest egg is still going to grow to your FI number by age 65. And to remind you, your FI number is that total number that your portfolio needs to be so that you can live off of it in a sustainable way for like 30 or 50 plus years. For example, let's say that your FI number is $1 million. I know that's low for some people, and I know it's maybe a little bit more for a very small portion of the population. However, let's say that's what your FI number is. You want to reach $1 million so that you can sustainably withdraw $40,000 every year for 30 years when you're 65. Coast FI would mean that at age 30, if you had $100,000, that you can basically coast to financial independence. You would no longer need to invest. You are basically investing optional at that point. If you wanted to speed up your timeline, you can invest more, but let's say you're age 30 and you have $100,000 invested, assuming a 7% growth, you would have $1 million by age 65. That means at age 30, you could coast. Early coast FI just takes it one step further and just brings the age, instead of it being 65, it could be like 45 or anything before 65. And think about how amazing it would feel to know that, hey, if I stopped investing, I could still become financially free before 65. That's personally what I'm trying to do next. Because at early coast FI, now I could say, hey, I'm going to become financially free anyway before 65, and that would give me the permission to prioritize a different financial goal. So whether that be kids or whether that be a home, or in my case, it's going to be both. So for me, if I want to retire at age 43, which is in 10 years with $1.5 million, my Coast FI number is about $762,000. And something to note is that that would be the number that I would have to reach this year. Otherwise, I have to recalculate it every year. And let me just show you how the math works. So if I have $762,000 invested at age 33 and it grows on average 7% every year without any monthly contributions, by age 43, I'm going to have about $1.5 million. And that $1.5 million represents $60,000 a year for expenses. And here's why that is super important for me to be aware of as I'm pursuing home ownership. Very simply put, every dollar that I put towards a down payment, I cannot put towards that $762,000 goal. And when I think about the freedom component that comes along with either having a down payment fund or early Coast FI, there's so much more peace and freedom thinking about me having more options. Here's how to calculate your early Coast FI number. The first thing that you need is to determine your FI number. This is typically 25 times your annual expenses that you're going to need in retirement. And this is done using the 4% rule. So if you take your annual expenses and divide it by 0.04, you're going to get your FI number. If you're going to be taking your money out early as well, then you should use 3.5 to be on the safe side. This is going to ensure that you're able to have a safe withdrawal rate for 50 plus years. So to do that, you would take your annual expenses and then divide that by 0.035. So if you're using $60,000 at the 4% rule, you're going to have 1.5 million. And if you want to take your money out early, then you're going to need 1.7 million. The second thing you want to do is determine your timeline to early retirement. I'll be using age 43, but you can choose your own age. The third thing that you want to do is calculate how many years are between now and that age. So if you're 33 and your target is 43, that's going to be 10 years. The next thing that we're going to do is use the early Coast-FI formula to figure out what our early Coast-FI number is. We're going to be using what is called the present value formula, but don't worry about what it's called. I'm going to walk you through it. So we're going to be solving for early Coast-FI, and we're going to need a couple of numbers. We're going to need the future value, which is going to be your FI number that you calculated in step 1. We're going to also need an annual growth rate. We're going to be using 7%. And we're going to need the amount of years until that future value. So in my example, in the last step, mine was 10 years. So you're going to need that number as well. So the formula becomes your early Coast-FI number is equal to your FI number divided by 1.07 to the power of the amount of years. So in my case, I would use $1.5 million as my FI number, and I would divide that by 1.07 to the power of 10 years. And that gives me $762,000. And for me, that number is going to go up a little bit, which is why I know I'm going to need some more time to be able to reach it. And I don't know if it's going to take me 1 year, 3 years, or more, but I'm hoping that it takes me less than the 10 years. And I know this is going to be ambitious, but I'm going to try and get to early Coast-FI in the next 3 to 5 years. And because this number is pretty high and it does feel hard from the amount of income that I'm making now, I know I'm going to need to be laser focused and I cannot be having multiple priority goals at this time. I'm going to need to lock in just like I did when I reached regular Coast-FI. And I can't think of a better way to distract myself than trying to get a home that I actually don't even need, that's really going to be a luxury. Because look, early Coast-FI, just like any other milestone, is a permission slip. It gives you permission to make career changes without fear. It gives you permissions to take calculated risks. It gives you permission to be able to pursue buying a home from a place of abundance instead of scarcity or external pressure. And it gives you permission to buy what you actually want instead of what you can barely afford. This math showed me that by just waiting a few more years before I prioritize home ownership could really unlock a whole new level of freedom for me before I even reach FI. And this new level of freedom would come with substantially more security. And as someone who really wants to do everything that I can to make sure that I'm spending the most amount of time with my future family, I am very much committed to this vision. And if you ask me, that is exactly what peaceful wealth building looks like. It's being crystal clear on what actually matters to you and putting that as your number one focus. Despite what your family is saying, despite what society is saying, making decisions based on both math and long-term vision is what's going to give you that peace of mind. But if you're making decisions based on social timelines or fear of missing out, that's just a great recipe to stay super stressed. And let me tell you, when you know your future retirement is secured, it is such a freeing feeling. I'm actually super curious. Do you view home ownership as a luxury or as a good financial decision? And after seeing the early Coast-FI math, has your perspective shifted a little bit? Let me know in the comments because I would love to get to know you and understand how you view these kinds of trade-offs. And if you're curious to see how long it's going to take you to retire on your current lifestyle, I have a mindful money workbook linked in the description. I've gotten a lot of good feedback on this as a really helpful, positively framed tool for people. And I know it's going to help you too if you're looking to find more money to contribute for early retirement. And in my opinion, it's a better place to start than a budget because you'll be able to really look at your full picture and how it relates to early retirement. I'm on a mission to guide 1 million women towards their next financial independence milestone goal. So if you are FI curious, or if you just want to watch me reach my next goal, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and like this video so my next video gets shown to you. And if you're new to this series, I invite you to check out part 1 and part 2 so you can see the 2 other things that I did instead of buy a home that ended up making me rich. I'll go ahead and put part 1 up on the screen for you. I'll see you next week.